Good evening, everyone. The time is 5 p.m. and the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees are now convening a workshop on Monday, May the 12th, 2025. A quorum of board members is present. This meeting has been duly called and a notice of meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. First item on the agenda is public comments. Becca, no one? All right. Moving on to item 3, there being no public comments. Board workshop. A, Goal 3, update, onboarding and leadership pipeline. Dr. Gold?
Yes, thank you, Board. The onboarding portion of this presentation this evening and discussion this evening is very much tied to the key progress measure underneath Goal 3. And so Todd is going to lead us off with an update on that particular key progress measure. And we slid in an update because we want to talk to you about where we are with our leadership pipeline work. Later in the evening when y'all discuss the key progress measures proposed for 25-26, you'll notice leadership pipeline mentioned within one of those KPMs, particularly around goal setting. So I'm excited for this conversation and workshop. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd to get us started.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So this is our KPM for Goal 3. So when we establish this, we're going to look by June 2025, and we look at all of our onboarding plans and assess those against the 30, 60, and 90-day survey, as well as a year-end survey. We just got the rest of the data back, which we'll be sharing tonight, and then just kind of have documented feedback through that survey process where we could be able to use that information and identify and implement improvements in our plans. And so, just a reminder, when we went through this process, we had a 2023-2024 key progress measure, and that key progress measure was developing onboarding plans, right? And so this year we took it a step forward and really wanted to make sure that those onboarding plans are working and ways that we can strengthen those and improve those as we continue to work with those every year thereafter. And so, again, this is a build on from that 23-24 KPM. We had a focus group that came together at a leadership session last summer, and where we brought in people together and started working on the questions that we should be asking as part of this onboarding survey, which we'll discuss here in a second. So we created that survey and started implementing that August 1st, and then start getting the 30, 60, 90-day feedback all throughout the year. So if you were hired in November, you got a 30-day feedback survey in December. And so that just kind of rotated all throughout the year. We shared that data in a leadership team meeting in the spring, and really looked and kind of honed in on the feedback that we're getting and ways that we could, make improvements for the upcoming years. And so this is some of the data. So we created this data. It's part of a Looker data system, and so this that you're looking at here is for all staff, and so it's for all levels of positions. We had about 125, 130 individuals that participated in this, provided feedback. You can kind of see the breakdown by position on the top left corner, and then the overall onboarding experience. And so the questions that they were asked was, how would you rate your overall onboarding experience during the time frame? And so 5 was the highest, so that's your blue section. And then 1 is the little slither of, I guess it's like an orangish section. There's kind of right up in the middle. So overall, we had about 93.8% that reported a 3 or 5. If you looked at just the 4s and 5s, we had about 79.3% reporting their overall onboarding experience. The second question that was asked of them is, were resources made available to you? I mean, did you have computers? Did you have what you needed to be able to do your job? So with that, 88.9% reported that they did. Middle chart in the middle, have support person. So everybody as part of the onboarding plan should have a support person that's designated with them, especially teachers. Teachers typically are assigned a mentor. And so you see 75.7% was what was reported there from all staff responding to the survey. And then you see the employees feeling valued at 93.6%. Any questions around that or anything stand out to you all?
At the bottom, those folks in the red, are they from a common area? in the district,
It's
or-
a little bit of everything. On these next 3 slides, I broke down teachers because that was the
Right.
highest response rate that we received was from
Yeah.
teachers. And so you can kind of see the teachers portion, but it's a little bit of everything.
Okay. And how many folks do we hire per year?
So at the beginning part of the year, we'll probably hire about 120, 130 teachers. And then paraprofessionals, auxiliaries, all those other individuals will probably be sitting around about 200 or so when we start the year. And then we
You got a
keep
really-
on adding
You got
throughout.
a pretty good sample then.
Pretty good sample. It's about 35, 40%.
They're not required to do the survey?
No, it's an anonymous survey.
Okay.
Because we felt like that was the
Understand.
best way to be able to get that
Sure.
information.
Is
Any
this
other
pulled
questions?
from the 30, 60, 90, or this is a
This is
composition of all?
all throughout. So this is 30, 60, 90, and everything combined.
Was there a common element amongst the no's?
So I think of the slide, I think there might be,
There's
so
another
there's some
slide, right?
feedback that
Okay.
we can go through, and
Okay.
I've kind of
Okay.
picked out the most common things that we
Okay.
saw. Onboarding teachers, this is just teachers, and this is their 30-day selection. And you see there the overall onboarding experience, about 66.7% were in the 4s and 5s, 90.3% in the 3, 4s, and 5s, and just a slither that reported a 2. Actually, nobody reported a 1. And then you see there for resources available, about 79.2% reported that they had what they needed to be able to do their job. And you're going to see some of those some of the things that we'll talk about with feedback, you can kind of fall into these categories here in a second. And then have support person, 81.9%, and then employees feeling valued of 91.7%.
Tom, is there an industry norm in doing this?
I haven't seen any industry norms
Okay.
in this, and haven't really compared it to. I'm not aware of another district that's
It's done
that's
something like
done
this?
something like this. Not to say there isn't. I just
Okay.
haven't run across it. And then when you see the 60 days, you really see an increase in the overall onboarding experience, 68.8% between the 4s and 5s, and 88.5% between with the 3, 4s, and 5s, which is actually a little bit lower than the 30 days. And this is, for most of these individuals, it's probably October timeframe when you think about, people talk about fall wall and kind of the things really kind of start heating up a little bit. So I don't know if that's a part of kind of the overall scoring, but we did see a slight decrease in the overall onboarding experience and their feel towards that. The resources available, 82%, and then have support person. That number grew. The red area grew a lot there, and so 73.8% is what reported that they had a support person, compared to 81.9% at the 30-day mark. And then employees feeling valued, 91.8% versus 91.7% at 30 days.
Can you talk about why maybe that red number grew?
Yeah,
Or
it's-
under the,
So I don't know, we've talked a little bit about this, so every teacher is assigned a mentor. And so I think what we've got to do as a system is making sure that our mentors, that we're following up with them, and we know kind of how they should be involved along the way as somebody's going through their onboarding experience, and making sure they're following up. I don't know if it's, maybe that wasn't happening or what it may be, or just the stress of the time of year where that kind of fell off a little bit.
From listening sessions,
Yes.
I think what also we felt was that it's also hitting that time of year where their mentor teachers are also super busy. And so a little bit less available than perhaps they were able to be at the beginning of the year, and that might have contributed to that as well.
so then is there a backup or a plan B if I know that my person isn't available to help? Then who?
Should be your instructional coach, depending on what the issue is, but instructional coach, assistant principal should be their backups.
So a little bit better news in 90 days, about 94.4% reported a score of 3, 4, and 5. 86.1% said 4 and 5. And then resources available moved up to 91.7%. Support person shrunk it back down, actually increased again, 86.1%. And then the employees feeling valued increased to 94.4%.
What was the percentage of teachers that responded of the whole?
So this was about 30, let's see here, 30, this was about 35% that responded.
I know it's anonymous, but are you able to capture data on primary, secondary campuses and see if there's a trend among high schools?
Yes, we can do that too. I didn't break down any of these charts like that, but we can break it down by the campus level and see kind of what the responses have been. And we, in each 30, 60, 90 days in the year-end information, it's been shared back out to those campuses and departments, because we did this across the board, and just so they can kind of assess their plans and make adjustments to it.
All right, so that, you maybe just answered my question, right? Is, did we do anything intentional after the 60-day numbers to impact the 90-day numbers? So what I think I just heard is you
Yes.
packaged up the feedback,
Yes.
got it back out to the campuses.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And we're doing that every month. They get an updated information. Yep. And so then this is the year-end information, ended with about 92.4%, saying 3, 4s, and 5 scores, 77.3% with 4s and 5s, 92.5% have resources available, 75.5% have that support person, and then 94.3% reported that they feel valued as through their own. Anything stand out in this set of graphs?
Back to the support person.
Back to the
again.
support
Right.
person, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's our biggest area.
Yeah, we got to figure out the
Mhm.
continuous mentorship and how do we keep that in place.
Absolutely. We
So
had,
Can you talk about that, the mentorship? Is it a volunteer thing for mentors to do this? I think we've talked about this, like there's even like a stipend involved. Can you talk about just the mentors?
so that's managed by our teaching and learning department. I know that they're selected by the campus principal, right?
Yes, it is.
And there is a stipend involved with it, and I believe they bring them in and meet with them regularly, the mentors regularly through teaching and learning, and kind of assess hey, here's what you should be focused on, here's what we need to be working on. And there's like a lot of material involved with that too that they review to help guide that learning with new employees.
We
Sure.
also had a position that portion of their work was around supporting the mentor program. And this past year, we attempted to not have a professional learning person over and supporting the whole district. We attempted to stipend that role. And so that was, as y'all know, Christy Chandler. So she's full-time principal and then trying to assist with the professional learning and mentor support on the side. And so this isn't the only reason. There are multiple reasons, but that is why that position is reinstated.
But, of course, this doesn't delineate out, so we hire a group of new teachers. They're not all new teachers. We hire people who may have been teaching for 15 years and don't, a support person's great, but they probably don't need the mentoring in that like our newbies, right? But we can't tell on this one.
We can't, it doesn't ask for years of experience, and you're right, that this includes those that have been previously teaching somewhere else, and then
Right.
those that have never been.
But that might be something we could
Yes,
add to our
absolutely.
surveying for next year
Yeah.
is delineating years of experience. But based on our listening sessions, our more experienced teachers that were new to us, their challenge really was around all the applications and technology. And, it's drinking from a fire hose at the beginning of the year and really trying to pace that and when is the most ideal time for them to get which application support. So one, trying to make sure we're doing it at the right cadence, but also students weren't necessarily rostered when they were sitting in a training, because that rostering of classroom sections comes a little bit later. So if you don't have your own kids and you're not in it with your own kids, sometimes it's not as meaningful, and then you look up in 2 weeks and need it. So that was feedback that they've given us that we're working on as we go into next year.
That's an important data point. That's a good
It
point
is.
that Jeff's making,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking, even with the survey itself, just making some other adjustments as well, just trying to see if we can narrow down, especially like with our paraprofessionals and auxiliaries, kind of down to the department level. An example is school nutrition. So when they fill it out, sometimes they'll select their campus and not necessarily the school nutrition department. So we're going to think about ways that we can get down to be able to identify those, not the individuals, but the category that they're working in. So this that you're looking at here is the feedback. And I'll be clear, like there was a lot of good things that came out of this, a lot of good things that were happening with the onboarding experience. We had a lot of positive feedback, but this here is some things we should look into and focus on moving forward. A lot of information overload. You think about somebody coming into a system, first days, and then they spend those first 2 weeks, and several of those days, or a couple of those, 2 or 3 of those days, are district, led days through trainings and those types of things. And so we heard repeatedly throughout even the 30, 60, 90, all through each one of those survey about information overload through that time frame. And just overwhelmed by the number of new hire events, all the things that are happening those first 2 weeks, which I think we've heard for a few years. Training was a big thing in this. They come in, they need training on Skyward. How do they even put grades into the system? Is some of the information that we heard. Repetitive information shared across new hire sessions. This last year we had Culture Day, Meet the Teacher, and Convocation all on the same day. Like we heard that feedback, right? So as we start planning for this next year, we're already working on how we're going to go about doing that. Is there things that can be consolidated to where we don't have repetitive information? The Culture Day information should be something that somebody feels in every session, right? And not just isolated to a particular day or anything. And then more training on specific programs, the Schoologies, their instructional programs that they utilize, and then more planning of the time in classroom with other teachers. Really heard that across like special ed and so forth, where they want to spend time with others and collaborate, even math contents and science contents they'd like to work cross-district on together regarding some of this.
So is the top the most common, Paul?
That's pretty much the order and like the number of hits, I guess you can say, per the highest ones. Yes.
So did you get specific feedback on the specific programs? Like, so we're going to talk about LMS later, like in the next meeting, right? So we're potentially looking at going from 3 to 1,
Yeah.
right? What's the impact here?
Yeah, so I don't think I got the feedback like that.
Yeah.
They just talked about training is needed.
Yeah.
If this is the system, then training is needed to be able to perform with that system.
So, Todd, based on what we got here, what kind of changes do you think you're gonna make going next year?
Yeah, so I can tell you, Christy Chandler, with her coming on as the director of professional development and so forth. So like she's already working on kind of what those first 2 weeks will be like, events will be like. I've talked with her last week. We're already incorporating Skyward training into that, as well as some other trainings on programs and those types of things. So we're trying to be intentional, but also don't want to overload them,
Right.
like the first one is. And so really just, and Dr. Golden referred to it, it's really that just-in-time information, right? Get it when you need it, that way you're going to remember it and be able to apply it and not get something at the beginning of the year that you don't utilize until the end of the year, right? Because you're not going to retain it.
And Todd, we've talked about this before, but refresh my memory on people who come in after the beginning of the year. We have a similar process for them as well.
A lot of the training for that, I don't know if y'all do your own.
No, and actually, I'd add that that's
Sorry.
one of the elements, that emerged from the data, and you can see the support mid-year where we saw a dip, is that we've got to improve our systems throughout the year when new people come on board and have intentional planning time and support for them embedded. That was a gap for us.
Any other questions regarding the feedback?
It's been valuable for you.
It's been, Yes, I think so,
To say
absolutely.
the least, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a lot of good information. I've enjoyed putting together the onboarding plan. I've shared that with Dr. Golden several times. Like, I think it's meaningful information that I think we can use forever, right? And just keep on doing every year. And then this is, just so y'all can see, this is, I know you probably can't read the small print of this, but this is just an example. This is Southwest Elementaries, and you speak to that just-in-time information. You know, that first set of information is prior to even coming into school, prior to even that first day, like, what's that communication look like, right? Are they gonna park? You know, just the common things that you think of, just being able to communicating with the individual, making sure they feel part of the team before they even show up on their first day, right? And then it heads into, what does that first day look like? You know, is it meeting people, having conversations, you know, just the orientation of staff to the building, those types of things. And then it heads into what does the first day with students look like? Are you gonna check attendance? You know, those types of things. And then you can see there it heads into the first week, and then the 30 days, and then time thereafter the 30 days, and then towards the end of the year.
So, I mean, I know this has the Southwest logo on it, right? But how much of this is standardized across the campuses versus customized for Southwest?
So I think you'll see a little bit different appearance to these things, but when we provided training in the summertime regarding this, when we first started our onboarding plans, right, so 2 years ago, we broke it down into the increments of 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and then for the remainder of the year.
And then within that, principals brought their sample
That's right.
onboarding plans at various times throughout the year in leadership team meetings.
Yes.
We're able to share their plans with each other, what's working, what's not. This has also helped to the point of someone moving in at the 60-day mark where everybody else started on day one. This tool now allows them to utilize that no matter what time someone comes into the system. And then every year we've asked them, well, every year, we've been doing this now 2 years.
2 years.
This is year 2. Been asking them to go back and do we called it empathy interviews with new teachers that went through their onboarding to give them feedback on what worked really well, what didn't, so that their next year's plan gets updated based on that feedback, so that it's something every year should get better and better based on the feedback of staff on their campuses. And every department person, including me, I have one of these for when I was onboarding Ben and Denise. Like every hiring manager is expected to have one for their staff.
Any other questions?
What's the accountability piece for this? Like, does district kind of, do you understand what I don't know if so how do we know that the admin at Southwest is following through on this? Is there an accountability piece for them?
I think throughout the course of the last 2 years, we've been talking about it regularly in leadership team meetings and kind of referring back to those plans and the survey data. The survey data is not going away. Like this, I don't think is something that, because the KPM is not going to be there next year, that we're going to stop doing, right? We're talking about ways to enhance the survey so we can continue to build upon those onboarding plans.
So I think the anonymous survey data is a big part of the accountability piece. They also have to submit their onboarding plans to HR so that we have access to those. The data is broken down by campus, and Ben and Denise have that, so they're able to include conversations about that data in their coaching time with campus principals.
Tom, moving forward, that Jeff mentioned the new data point. Anything else that you guys are gonna delve into in terms of gathering information?
I think while we're trying to keep it still anonymous, really trying to break it down to make sure that we're really identifying the categories of those positions. Because there's been confusion, like I pointed out earlier, like with school nutrition, custodial staff, and those types of things.
Okay.
So that's one of them. I think that's probably the biggest one, and the experience one would be a good one too.
Okay, just real quickly, thank you to Todd. So I think I've shared with y'all before, Todd and I ended up in a conference, and we truly were the only educators in this entire conference. And the whole conference was on onboarding. And so it didn't matter the industry, They were all there really seeking to learn about how to improve onboarding, to include pre-boarding and off-boarding. And so we are keeping both of those in mind as this gets better and better over time, because it's important from pre-hiring all the way to your off-boarding as a part of our district. So more work to be done here, but just appreciate Todd taking the lead on that. Okay, so am I?
I think you're kicking us off.
I think I am this right now. So the next part of our time together is we just wanted to give you an update on our work around leadership pipeline. And you're, again, going to see some evidence of this in a key progress measure. But we wanted to, of course, you know the team. Sorry, that's us. We are your team. Y'all know who we are. But Denise and Todd and I have been the primary and original team for getting this work off the ground. And this all really began in thinking through, we know the impact of a leader, particularly a campus leader, and the impact that leader has on outcomes for students, on culture and climate. And so we wanted to make sure as we entered this work that it really was anchored in our foundational work, because this came from the voices of our community, our board. So we want to make sure as we're defining leadership, that it's leadership to lead to what is important for Belton ISD. And so we knew we had a really good foundation we could anchor our work in, along with our goals and vision, our values and beliefs. We knew, thanks to the board, that we had positions in place for supervision and support of campus principals, and Ben and Denise's position. We felt like that was a really good foundation for this work as well. We had already made a pretty heavy investment in learning for campus leaders, really talking about and differentiating. There's a big difference in being a good manager of your building and being an instructional leader for improved outcomes for students. So was already investing in that professional learning. What we were also seeing is that external hiring was the norm. So we had to ask ourselves, so why is that? External hiring in and of itself is not a problem. Sometimes that brings fresh ideas, new ideas, but the data was skewed towards external hiring. And so we knew that was something we wanted to also look at. And then we knew we were also in the process of developing good onboarding plans. So we felt like we had good foundations for heading into this work. The problem of practice, if you will, that we felt is that we really lacked a structure for really systematically investing in growing our assistant principals to be principal-ready leaders. We were doing a really good job of training around the operational aspects, discipline, investigative processes, but the instructional leadership piece they were not getting. They wanted that, and we could tell in our hiring process that that was one of the major factors hurting our assistant principals in the interview process. And so based on that, we went to work on what we've been calling the Holdsworth Center that was created by HEB to really support and grow leaders in the state of Texas. They were a partner with us in this work. And so we started working on this framework. So I've been sharing with you, really, we felt like we had the district culture and context to start leading this work. We did not have a clear definition of what a leader in Belton ISD, what are the competencies of a leader we were looking for, what are the skills, the look-fors. And so we went to work on starting to build out this framework. You'll see in the middle of it, there are pillars around, because this whole framework is about how do you identify ready leaders or high potential leaders, how do you develop them, how do you place them at the appropriate school to match their strengths and the school's needs, and then what kind of support do you give them. And so to begin our work there, we were like, let's collect a little data and see where we are in those areas. And I think Todd's going to share with you, we have now surveyed teachers, instructional coaches, principals, and assistant principals now 2 years in a row. And so he's going to go through and show you some of the data from surveying those pillars and the improvements we're already seeing and where we are seeing no improvement, and we'll talk to you about why.
So again, we've been surveying, doing the survey in the fall of 2023, and we did the survey in fall of 2024. Our focus in the leadership pipeline work was primarily on principals and assistant principals. And those are the top two lines that you see there in the green, and they kind of like off blue, kind of going upward in that identify column. So our focus was there, and the impact to those individuals, you can kind of see that they've increased from fall 23, 24 of how they feel about the identification part of this process. And then you see there with develop, it's really the same type of story. Especially with the principals and assistant principals. We have work to do, and that's part of our work over the next several years is going to be working to do the same thing with lead teachers and teachers as well.
So real quick, go back.
Yeah.
So just so that we're clear, the line seems pretty flat, if not down slightly on identifying with teachers, and then it looks up slightly for teachers on developing. None of our work this year was focused on the teacher. We felt like we had to first start with clarity around the role of principal, then clarity around assistant principal, and then as we talk about moving into the future, our work's then going to move into teacher leadership and district leadership. So we started at the principalship level knowing that was the most impactful one, and then we're going to work our way out in both directions.
What's
So-
the,
Go ahead.
what's the methodology on scoring these ratings? How is that determined?
Well, the survey is an anonymous survey of these different groups, and they rate there are questions tied to identify and develop. There's several questions underneath each of these categories, and then based on how they respond, it is aggregated into one score for the pillar.
Then you can see information on this slide regarding the place pillar and the support pillar. Really the same type of thing. You see on the support, only the principals are surveyed as part of that area according to with the Holdsworth survey that was sent out. But you still see the same increase with the principals and assistant principals, and that flat line kind of look with your lead teachers and teachers, again, because the focus has been on principals and assistant principals. So with our leadership definition process, so as we started this work, we were in a lot of task force groups came together, a group came together to kind of really dive in with the thinking about the foundational knowledge and foundational things that are in existence within Belton ISD, our journey of a graduate work, our vision, our values and beliefs, right? And we wanted to build upon that. And so all of this stuff is anchored in research, and we looked at various other organizations. HEB was one that really stood out, at least to me. And we shared it with this group that came together to start thinking about what our definition should be for Belton ISD. And so they also created the logo, and then it eventually started with drawings on napkins and papers and those types of things, and then we landed on this. Anything stand out to you all about this logo in particular?
See some commonalities with our values and beliefs.
Yes.
And our goals.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
our vision.
Absolutely. Notice the purple in the middle too, so try to incorporate all of our colors as well.
Got it in there.
We got it in there.
You have no
We
idea
did
the
it
debate
first.
that happened trying to figure that out, and so, yeah.
So then that eventually led to our competencies and descriptions. And again, try not to reinvent the wheel, trying to utilize language that already exists in our values and beliefs, and vision, and journey of a graduate work too. So that you'll see on the right-hand side, there's some overlay, and I'll point out like cultivation relationships, develops a culture of value, support, and growth, right? And so we have a goal about value supporting and challenge to grow, right? And so lots of overlays that you'll see throughout these competencies and descriptions. Okay. And I'm turning it over to Denise.
First of all, thank you for having me tonight. This is some passion work for me. The more that we've engaged in this, I just see incredible power and value in what it has brought to the table for us here in Belton ISD. I'm going to go back to the slide previous that is the leadership definition, and I'm going to distribute. This is the first profile that we developed, and it's called the school leader level profile. And then you'll see it'll say in parentheses for the principal. So we're calling that the school leader. That's the level we're looking at. And the reason I went back to this slide is because I'd like you to take a look at the profile that I just distributed and ask you to look at our leadership definition. Talk to me a little bit about what do you notice about this profile compared to our leadership definition? What are some things that kind of stand out to you?
We're basically taking this definition and continuing to break it down into its parts, right? Because the question I had was how do we take this to potentially evaluation of people on how well they're doing these things, right?
Yes.
And so it all kind of builds up to what we're looking for at the top.
That's exactly what it is. So you'll notice with our leadership definition, it starts with those 3 broad categories. Each of those broad categories has 3 competencies, and then we've labeled or given a description for each competency. But we all know that even with that, some of it's left to interpretation for us to figure out for ourselves. So what does that mean for me? What this profile does is it takes it to a very descriptive level for each leader category, if you will, in our system. And so this one talks about the principal, and it talks about for each of the competencies. So the first page you see is just the whole first category, so the red bar up there. And it talks about if I'm communicating for impact, what are the skills that we need our principals to have to communicate for impact? And then with each of those skills, what are the look-fors? And you can just see it getting more and more minute and descriptive so that we can then look at this. And there are lots of things we can do with this profile and things that we are using it for. So this can be a self-evaluation tool. As a principal, I can look down through here and I can start to identify where are my strengths and where are some things that I need to strengthen. Or if I'm trying to solve a problem on my campus, this gives me some things to lean into, some skills and some look-fors as I'm attacking that problem or approaching something with my staff. You'll notice also this is 4 pages, so the first 3 pages go with the categories that you see on our leadership definition. But one of the things that we have found really impactful is the very back page. So if you'll flip it over to the back, it talks about values and time allocation. And what this does is it talks about if I'm moving from the role of assistant principal into principal, what's different? And so this is very descriptive. And we've used this a lot with our onboarding with our new principals this year, but also as we have worked in developing our what we call aspiring principals, our current assistant principals who are aspiring to be principals, so that they can see what is different with my time. How do I spend my time as a principal that's different than assistant principal? What we didn't want to have were principals who are acting as lead assistant principals. We need them acting as principals. And this really, really talks about what that means. This tool has become incredibly important for us as our leaders have set goals. We have asked them to anchor into these goals. Our principals this year took their first try at setting their goals with the leader profile. We're going to continue to have them anchor into their goals set around this leadership profile. It's also been incredibly important as we've been hiring. We have used this document to help us hire principals, to create questions, to do screenings. So we know what we're looking for. We can use these competencies, skills, and look fors to develop questions that help us to screen candidates, to then even do our community round interviews, and eventually write job descriptions, and actually eventually become and help us with our evaluation tool tied to this. Does anyone have any questions about this particular profile before I go on?
I'll just add real quickly, a lot of this work was anchored in the leadership pipeline, how to build leadership-powered companies. That was the book that was one of the foundational pieces to this work. The other piece that I'm super proud of is this already is impacting job descriptions for new principals as we're hiring them. All job descriptions ultimately at that level will be rewritten. But not just is it driving our interview questions and process, but the surveys, when we do an anonymous survey with teachers and with parents, when we have a vacancy for a particular school, that helps us know which particular questions to ask for that particular school, instead of asking the same interview questions for every school as though every school has the exact same needs. So it's really helped us really marry together the perception data and survey data from parents and staff with our work with our school level profile. So it has really improved our ability to differentiate even in the interview process with questions.
We have a whole bank of questions that are related to each of these categories. And so as we are getting back the survey, we can go right to that bank and see which questions align to our competencies and what we're looking for that also tie to the survey data. It has been really impactful for us. Before I go on, the only other thing I'll say is that we currently have in draft form, it's in its final revision stage, this profile for assistant principals and also for the executive level leader. So we've got both of those documents in the pretty final phase for their draft, but we're not quite ready to roll them out until we get one last look at them by the people who need to see them, who have voice, and that is the people that are impacted by it. So that's one of the lessons that we learned as we were doing this, and here you'll see us developing the school leader level profile. And you'll notice in the picture there are several of our principals. We needed to have their voice in developing the profile. So whoever is impacted by the profile has had a voice in what you see as far as the skills and look fors. And we basically wanted people to say, when we look at these, are these in fact the correct things that we need to develop for you to be effective at this level? So we have made sure that we have gotten voice as we've done that. We also used this document with our Aspiring Principal Academy. We have leaned into this in the development of our assistant principals so that we feel like when and if they become principals, they are as close to being ready day one to take on the job as they possibly can be. We've tried to give them that experience. Another thing that is been a big part of this is what we call our Ready Leader criteria for determining, okay, we know we have got these profiles, but then how do we determine which of our assistant principals are ready to have some development to become principals? This profile, or this Ready Leader criteria, again, if you'll notice along the left-hand side, some of these terms should be looking familiar. This is definitely tied to our leadership definition. But what you'll notice is this is a tool that we use, having our principals and either myself or Ben, depending on if it's elementary or secondary, talk about and go through a self-assessment with our assistant principals, but then also to determine, has the assistant principal had this experience, but then to this depth of rigor? And this has been a key important difference. It's, when we look at it, it's the first one, for example, led a content or grade level team in delivering school-wide results that are critical to the school's success. most of our assistant principals have been in a role where they have been leading teams in working around PLCs or different things like that. But then if you look at, have they done it to this level of commitment or the competency, they have the ability to manage a team towards improved outcomes for all students. So not just that they're the leader, but that they are leading in a way that is showing improved student results. And so that gives us a chance to look down through here, and it's called has it, needs it. And so for a principal to mark the assistant principal as has it, they need to have demonstrated most of this to this level of competency, and then there's a place for notes. So for example, what is your evidence? What is helping you to make that decision? And some of it is just us sitting with either me or Ben, the principal and the assistant principal, and having conversation around, well, you led this team. What did that look like? What kinds of things did you do? What is the evidence of your success? And then what we do is we can determine which of our leaders are ready right now, which of our assistant principals are showing readiness right now. They could take on the role of being a principal should it open up, which will be ready in 6 months, 1 year, or 2 to 3 years. And that helps us to know what level of support do we need to provide to help them to grow in that leadership pipeline, we call it. So the work that is done between their current role and developing them to be ready to take on the next role is what we call the pipeline. And that's where we give them stretch opportunities, we give them in-class, if you will, learning with Ben and I, where we're using these criteria, these profiles, to help develop them, to give them some skills. And then they're also doing on-the-job stretch assignments with their principals, which is about 70% of the learning. And that has been a huge impact for us. In fact, when we first flipped to the leadership pipeline, you saw a picture of Christy Blattner standing up giving a presentation. When our assistant principals engaged in a stretch opportunity, they had to take on a task that was determined from this Ready Leader profile. We said, okay, where is an area you need to develop and grow? And then we also have a bank of tasks. So the principal and Ben or I would sit down with them, would sit with the principal, and we would pick out 2 to 3 tasks that would help develop whatever that area is. That is then presented to the assistant principal, who gets to choose from one of those 3 tasks. All right, these are 3 things we believe would help you grow in the area you are showing a need for growth. Which one would you like to take on? As soon as they take it on, it becomes theirs. And our direction to the principal is, you are not leading this work. You need to be as hands-off as possible. We're giving them an experience to feel like what it's like to be a principal. They need to lead this work. They need to set up check-in meetings with you on a regular basis every other week. They need to talk to you about their progress and their growth. And it culminates with a presentation. And part of that presentation is not only what work did you do, but what skills did you develop? Because it's all about developing leadership skills. Not just, I did this project, but what did this project, what skills did you develop that will generalize into other things when you're leading a campus? That presentation is also really a strategic process, because when we do interviews, our candidates need to give a presentation, and we gave guidance around how do you give a good presentation? How do you put together a good slideshow? How do you tell your story without reading from every single slide? And I can tell you, this last round of interviews, our candidates who went through stretch opportunities and had practiced delivering a presentation compared to some of our outside candidates who had several slides with lots of words and stood and read them to us, it was remarkable the difference in skill that we noticed. So finally, this is nothing more than just showing you that we've made this a system. It's a cycle. We go through this process on a regular, predictable basis, and it helps us to have a continuous cycle for identifying and developing our ready leaders. Any questions about all of that? That's a lot of things.
I have a question, and it's
Sure.
just, and you actually just kind of mentioned it, so it's a little bit off topic, but, because I know this is leadership pipeline within our, but, I mean, we can't have tunnel vision, we can't create silos. So, especially like this last sheet you gave us, where y'all have really identified some things that, hey, you need to have been able to do these things, demonstrated these things. Now, those that are internal, that's one thing, but are we able to pull information from this when we're interviewing outside candidates? Now, of course, hard to verify what they did at their old campuses, but we don't always get to promote from within. I know that we have to hire people
Correct.
from without, so if we pulled some of our most important things off of here too and said, hey, yes, this is internal, but HR, these are things we want to see in our external candidates. If they can't check some of these boxes, they're not for us right now.
So I think the way that this is reflected in our hiring process is we have a screening interview, which we have found incredibly important. So the first round of an interview for a principal is a virtual 15-minute interview, and it's usually just myself and Ben, and there are 4 questions, and they come from right here.
Okay.
And then we have a rubric where we score the candidates, and we score independently, and then we put them together, and we're able to have conversation about, were these candidates that we screened able to demonstrate the level of competency that we're looking for, to the point that we feel like we want them to move on to a community round interview.
Okay.
And that screening interview has really helped us identify high quality candidates to move on to our community round, to the point where we've had to have some significant debate about who's moving on from this community round into our final round interview with Dr. Golden. So we found that it has brought us some of our best candidates.
Thank you.
I love seeing this. So this is very much in line with kind of how we do this in my corporate life, right? So we're tracking very much like this. It makes a huge difference, and this has always been a black box for me. Wasn't really clear. This is very clear how we're doing it here now. So I love seeing it. How much are we looking at sort of having the leaders come together and look at consistency at the next level down, right? So the assistant principals over here and assistant principals over there, we're kind of rating these things the same way.
If you didn't ask that question,
Yeah.
I was gonna have her speak to that and talk about the calibration work that we're doing.
Yeah, we have been moving in the realm of calibrating, where we're doing walks together and talking about that very same thing. We will ask our principals and our assistant principals to come together and look at the profiles, and we want to make sure that we're scoring fairly. So how are we determining when we're marking an assistant principal a certain way? What is our criteria for making that determination? And if I'm thinking something completely different than what you're thinking, that's not really fair. So we've got to come around the table and talk about, what does that mean? What is the evidence that we're looking for that would show us where somebody is? And when we see outliers, that's where conversation has to come in. So let's say we notice that somebody has marked their assistant principal really high and somebody else has marked them really low. Those are probably outliers that we want to talk through.
Yeah, so we do an exercise like this twice a year, and actually pull everybody into a room and look each other in the eye, and I have to talk about the folks on my team and how I.
Yeah.
So we have,
How
We've
I-
got
yeah.
talent
we
talks.
have a group that comes
Yeah.
together called
Okay.
Vacancy Planning Committee Group, and so we review each one of these things, and then we push back and ask questions to kind of validate the information.
And we do it twice a year, and they also brought principals to the table to look at them together, so that they're in the room together to try to continue to work on calibrating that across campus.
And what really was impressive is when they sat in groups of about 4 and had to talk about their assistant principals, and they were using the Ready Leader criteria, we would hear principals say, oh, mine aren't doing that, so maybe I marked them too high. And they were realizing for themselves that they maybe were out of line. And so it was very, very good.
So we are in our infancy on this. I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to accomplish in a year. There's a lot of work still ahead of us. We have a beautiful project management sheet with Gantt charts, and we did a RACI of who's responsible, accountable, who needs to be consulted and informed on all of the steps to implement. But we know that this is going to be one. I don't know that the journey's ever over, but we have a 3-year plan that we have developed, and where do we want to be by the end of next year, the next, and 3 years out. So I know that all of this will continue to get better and better, but the most important thing that we're working on is how do we make sure that we can sustain this work. This is not meant to be we were here, we did it, one of us leaves, it goes away. We want this to be system impacting work to live way beyond us in the system. And so these are kind of the challenges we've been pushing each other and the broader team on. How do we make sure that it lives beyond just 3 champions that have been doing a lot of this work behind the scenes? We want to, again, extend it beyond the assistant principal. Again, we want district level, and we're really close to having that profile built out. Teacher leader is the next really important piece of this, and so we want to make sure that we continue to move in those directions. And again, we want to continue to build buy-in around this so that we're really utilizing these skills and look-fors. I will tell you, I self-assess using this tool. What are the things that I need to grow in? Which competencies do I want to focus on? We want this not to be where someone's just checking a box and it's just compliance. We want this to be so second nature. It's the way we do our business. And so we know we've got work to get it to be that systemic and systematic. Kind of long-term, where we're headed, we've already mentioned job descriptions. Every job description that ever since the profile has been developed, we have been updating as we've been going along, but we know we have more job descriptions still to do. Eventually, Ben and Denise particularly have already been looking at and working towards, probably as soon as next year, we may be coming to you with a recommendation for a new evaluation system for principals and assistant principals. And so, as well as district leaders, we're going to be working on that and hope to be able to bring that to y'all in the future, aligned to this work. And we've already talked about beyond the roles we've already talked about. We will have we feel like we need a place on our website that makes this really clear. What are we about in terms of leadership? What are the supports we have? Those kind of things. One for just transparency, but also I think that will serve as a recruitment tool as well. I can tell you that the outside applicants that have applied for our current and most recent vacancies, one of the things when I've had a final call to let the individuals know if they do or do not get the job, one of the things that has been consistently said to me is what's attracting them here is the level of support for the role of principal. It's a hard job, and we know that, and people are starting to take notice that there are some good support systems being built here for that. Vacancy forecasting, the metrics we've been using from the Holdsworth Center has been dead on in predicting vacancies, and so we can certainly talk to you about that more in the future, but that's just helping us plan for. You want a bench that has multiple people ready for any given one vacancy. I think it's a 3-to-1. Is it 3-to-1?
Our goal is 2 to 1.
2-to-1. They're like, careful, girl. 3-to-1 sounds better. But anyway, we know we need to deepen our stretch assignments, and so these are just things we want to continue to work on as we continue to go deeper with our leadership pipeline work. It's 5:58. We got 2 minutes for questions. And you can always shoot us more questions. But any thoughts, comments, wonderings for follow-up that you'd like to see?
This is fantastic. Good work, Denise, and Ben, for Ben.
Thanks.
We're pretty fired up about this, I'm
I-
not gonna lie.
I could talk
This
to you
has
all
been
about
good
this
work.
for
Well,
a
you've
long
always
time. I
stressed
love
to me
this
how
work.
important leadership is on the campuses and how that plays a part in moving the needle.
Yeah,
So, this is just part of that.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's all we have tonight.
Okay, well, that concludes our board workshop this evening. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 5:58 p.m.
Thank y'all.